Hello?
Pray to let go.
Hello?
The outward control, trying to be God. I run in my sin. Instead I get quiet and I go within, recover my own power by joining with Him, finding another world.
Hello.
Hidden gem
Lyndol Descant here, and it is Tuesday, April 9th, 2024, and you're listening to a song that I wrote a few years ago. Actually, must have been about 2021. Is that the year that the Delta variant went around? So we're going to listen to this song today as part of our active listening exercise. It's a video that I released on Friday. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about this today. But first of all, hello. How is everybody doing? We seem to still be here, survived the eclipse. At least the United States didn't break into two, like I saw some predictions about the Mississippi. And actually, I don't mean to laugh about it and mock it, because who knows? I mean, some people are saying that it's not an immediate thing. It's like within the next 6 months kind of thing. And also I could be mocking this and saying, oh, we made it. And then, I don't know, it's the end of the world tomorrow for some other reason. So I'm not mocking it on that level, but I will say I'm a bit relieved that all chaos did not erupt immediately from the eclipse. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about first, is just eclipse experiences and the energetic effect possibly of that, and get into this song Angel Prayer and why I decided to release that this last week. And we're going to use it for an active listening session. We'll listen to it, discuss it, and talk a little bit about the chord progression of it. Get a little bit into the practicality, nuts and bolts of songwriting. That's a good song to do it with. Then I want to talk about a podcast that I was on this last week, Donald Jeffries' I Protest. You can look him up on most platforms, including YouTube, though I don't think that our particular show is up on YouTube yet. Hopefully it'll be up soon, but it looks like they kind of come up a few weeks later. But he did a panel. He invited some people to come on and talk about their experiences with the present time economy. And being that I feel like there's a lot of gaslighting going on these days, and it's kind of hard to get the truth of things, I wanted to be on there and participate. But man, it turned out to be a much deeper session and discussion than I had anticipated. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to get into something that came up on that conversation. That's the idea of people being lucky, people getting into places of positions of power, positions of influence through luck. And I sort of countered that on the show with Dawn, saying, I'm not sure that it's just luck. So we're going to get into a little bit more of the current things that are coming to light in the music industry, and talk a little bit about how that connects with sort of keeping people out, being a barrier to keeping people out based on certain standards that are happening in the music industry, and particularly for women. And the idea that sex sells. And so if you're somebody who doesn't really want to use that, how does that end up affecting you? So yeah, those are the main topics that we'll discuss today. But if we have time, I do want to get into a discussion I've been wanting to have about psychedelics and music, and something else that I talked about on Dawn's show, which is just frequency, using music, psychedelics, using different things to try to raise your frequency. So we'll get into all of that today, but just want to start by saying I hope that you are doing well out there, and that you maybe got to see the eclipse. I don't know, I couldn't really get excited about it. Everybody was so excited about it. And I'll be honest with you, I did go a little bit there with the doomsday people. I really try not to get pulled into that stuff. Like I said, I've thought it's the end of the world so many times. But yet I still have an ear to it. And maybe this is one of the reasons why I need to get off Twitter completely. But I'll just see headlines here and there, and things get stuck in my brain that way. And so I did kind of start to worry. I guess really what triggered me more than anything was the earthquakes in New York. Because I had seen some people that had been predicting an earthquake on the East Coast, and they had been saying something regarding eclipses like causing tectonic shifts and stuff. And certainly the moon has an effect on our tides. I don't know why the sun wouldn't. Also, I was seeing things about the sun being in a solar maximum, so it was like going to be this blast when it came back. Anyway, I tried not to get pulled into it, but I did a little bit, especially because somebody that I love was going to be back in New York, and I wasn't going to be there. And so it was just that fear of something happening to him. And that's the reason why I wanted to release my song Angel Prayer. This is a song that I wrote when a loved one was sick with the Delta, and we were quarantined together for 2 weeks. And listen, I'm not going to get into the whole COVID pandemic, scandemic, etc., etc. But what I will say is that my loved one was very, very sick, and it was unlike anything I've seen before. It was very strange. It was almost like a frequency or something, like these waves would come through. And as it was lasting and lasting, it wasn't getting better. It was just kept cycling. And there was this weird cycle that would happen. He'd get a little better, and then he'd get really bad again, and then really better. So going through this cycle was just absolutely nerve-wracking. Also, everybody was like, oh, you're going to get it for sure, which I never did. But in part, I sort of saw it as a frequency, which is the way I tend to default on things, especially when I get into survival mode. It was like I had to keep my frequency up and not positive. We'll talk a little bit more about the difference between just positive thinking versus sort of transcending and getting into that space of, it's kind of like a higher vibration that sort of transcends the duality. So it's not positive or negative. It's like transcends that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but not to digress from this story. Writing this song was a way to keep my mind focused. And so this song I wrote from the place when you love somebody so much, and there's only so much you can do for them, and you're watching them suffer, and you really have to put them in God's hands, and you really have to trust God like deeper than you ever have before. It's almost like if it was you suffering, you'd almost be able to handle it better, but it's when somebody you love is suffering, and it's out of your control. There really is only so much that you can do, but it really is about putting them in God's hands and trusting that they are safe in God's hands. So that's why I wrote this song called Angel Prayer. And I think we'll go ahead and listen to it right now. Why not? Well, this is a little bit of a longer song for mine. I mean, a lot of times when I'm writing a song, it's somewhere between 4 and 5 minutes long, even with an improvisation section, which most of my songs have. This one is 7 minutes and 27 seconds. And when I wrote it, like I said, I was sitting down at the keyboard in between sort of nursing and caring, and I wanted it to be long. I wanted it to be slow. I wanted it to be meditative. I almost wanted it to be everything self-indulgent when it comes to the piano, because sometimes there's a certain way you can play music on a piano and it feels really good to you, but it maybe can get boring for your listener. But I wasn't concerned about that. So I wanted this song to be as long as it needed to be. I wanted it to express what I needed it to express. And I needed it to last a while so that I could stay in that space, a safe vibrational space, for a good 7.5 minutes there. And by doing that, it would sort of bring me back to an equilibrium that I could maintain for a while. And then when I lost it, I would be back over at the piano on this song. So this is what it is, Angel Prayer. I'm actually calling it a few different names. Angel Prayer, like semicolon delta, because I like sort of reminding myself that it was the delta when I wrote it. Here we go.
pray to let go of the outward control, trying to be God. I run in my sin. Instead I get quiet and I'll go within, recover my own power by joining with Him, finding another world, a hidden gem where lies and illusions disappear again. I pray for the angels to hold on to Him as He bucks and brawls, fighting the demons within. I see His soul so grand and free. I pray, Lord Jesus, have mercy on Him. I pray, Jesus, Master, have mercy on me. Every time I hear Him cry out, my stomach feels so sick. I'm flooded with fear to think of the worst. It was my way to cope in a world of madness. OCD was my dog. As a girl I lacked the faith to trust in a voice that spoke to me of joy. It spoke of love. It said to hold on, you will forget, but then one day you'll remember again. And one day you'll find Him a man to love, and you'll know for sure He's sent from above. Just have the patience to trust beyond time that all is well, 'cause God is loving and kind. I pray for the angels to hold on to Him as He bucks and brawls, fighting the demons within. I see His soul so grand and free. I pray, Lord Jesus, have mercy on Him. I pray, Jesus, Master, have mercy on me. How many times has this nightmare shocked me and rocked me and knocked me and clocked me? But truth is the truth, more real than the pain. Please, Holy Spirit, we need your So I pray by His side, a woman in love, so thankful for this man from above, Forgive me the times I could not see. I knew error was dawning right before me. I release my fears of the unknown. I trust the voice now to guide my bones. I pray for patience and faith to know that God is with us, even in this Truman Show. I pray for the angels to hold on to Him as He bucks and brawls, fighting the demons within. I see His soul, so grand and free. I pray, Lord Jesus, have mercy on Him. I pray, Jesus, Master, have mercy on me.
So that's Angel Prayer Delta. Yeah. So I just released this song last Friday, and I set it to some recent images I've gotten of bluebonnets in the Texas Hill Country. If you're not a Texan, then you don't know that bluebonnets are this time of year, and they're just absolutely, we're all fascinated with them. They look so beautiful in the field, and they can be a bit of a cliche, but especially after Mozart last week, I'm sort of exploring cliches, I guess because I'm in a different mindset. So all these things are new to me. I'm being away from Texas from so long, and definitely being out of touch with being in a field of bluebonnets, which typically, you see them on the side of the road and you're happy to see that. But I got the chance to be out amongst them last few weekends ago, actually. Easter weekend, and so I set the video to that, and it's kind of, in the beginning of it, you hear sirens. Now, I was in New York when I recorded the vocals and really didn't notice the siren. You get very used to it, but heard back in the playback that one of the takes I did had the sirens in it, but I liked it. It's kind of one of those choices that happened. It was a mistake. Obviously, that's not clean vocals to have sirens in the back, but it kind of illustrated the point that I was making. I mean, that's how it felt during that time, like that sense of urgency, that sense of chaos. It was interesting because when I put it with this video, it doesn't really match up. The sirens last the whole first verse up until the first chorus. And it doesn't really match the images, these serene images of the bluebonnets, but it's the imagery, or it's the expression of what it's like when you're in the middle of a really difficult situation, but you find your sense of calm, you find your balance, you find your faith. And it feels like that. Like you can literally feel like you have bluebonnets on the inside of your heart, blowing in the wind gently while you have these sirens and this chaos and this fear swirling around you. So I like it for that reason. I like the video because I want it to be that place for people if they need that, to be able to come and get a sense of peace. And so that's the video is up on my YouTube. But like I said, I released it last Friday. And the song is not available. I haven't released it as a single yet. And I don't know when I plan to, because I have these songs that I finished that I need to release, and I'm sort of maybe making too big of a deal of it, or the timing isn't right, because I have these songs ready to go. To be honest, I've been trying to untangle some legal issues in the background in some of my previous releases and make sure that going forward, all my releases are done in a very smart music biz type of way. And that is certainly a discussion I'd like to get on get on this show more to empower other musicians with the knowledge that I've learned. So that's been holding me up for a little while, but I'm really not being held up by that anymore. And instead, I'm trusting my intuition on what to release. And this one came up as the one to do last weekend. So I did it. And then I realized I wanted to release it today, because I recognize that there's many of us that are experiencing, or we're in a situation where a loved one is suffering. They're either ill, they're facing other sort of difficulties. We really don't know what each other is facing. How many of us really let other people into our inner circle and really talk about the challenges that we're dealing with? I mean, most of us don't have that many people that we can, or, maybe there's some other people that kind of tell everybody what's going on with them, but that, doesn't negate the fact that that person is experiencing what they're experiencing. But it's all the more real when it's happens to be somebody that you know somewhat closely. Maybe not they're not your inner circle. They come across being very professional, and then you sort of hear behind the scenes what they're actually dealing with in their personal life. So I think we're in that place. I think we're in that time period where many, many, many of us are facing some super big challenges in our life, and learning to let go of our loved ones, learning to trust that God has them and that we don't get codependent about that and try to fix it for them. That is a line that we have to walk, because we will absolutely get used up right now with all of our friends and family that might be experiencing things, in some cases horrific things, in other cases things that are just difficult to deal with. But we've got our own things, I'm sure. I certainly have. So how do you learn that sort of emotional maturity of understanding that life is what it is? It's acceptance of what is, even when it's not at all the way that you would want it to be. And then on top of that, the faith that your loved one is going to be okay. Your loved one is strong enough to handle it, that your loved one has a relationship, a vertical relationship with God. And let's say they don't. Maybe your loved one isn't somebody that has built a faith, or maybe you're not either. Then where do you find that strength at that point? Where do you find the comfort to know that it is going to be okay? It much more than relies on what they're doing or what you're doing about the scenario, and it makes things much, much harder. But at the same time, to be honest with you, having faith in those situations, it maybe is even harder than that, because it is really difficult to keep our faith intact and to trust that there is a benevolent God when you see such suffering. Now, why am I talking about all this suffering? Well, as I mentioned, I was on that panel with Donald Jeffries, I Protest, and I've spoke about him a bit last week. He's a researcher that's been around since the 60s. He's been doing incredible work. He's used to kind of doing it at a vacuum and nobody really noticing, and he's just steady on for decades, continued his walk with truth. And more recently, he's getting more and more people acknowledging him, and having more and more of a tribe. And so he gathered some of us together to discuss our financial situations. It's not really something I'm that comfortable talking too much about, to be honest with you. But I wanted to go on there to just at least share my perspective from the music business, because I do think that we've been a canary in the coal mine. Our business has been devalued since the 90s, I would say. That was the last great decade of bands and local musicians and being able to come from a grassroots place. I think things really, in many industries, but in the music industry, really started getting manipulated from that time on. Now, you could say that the 70s was probably the heyday, in my opinion. Like, that was the time when music was really happening, and the corporate jockeys weren't in there changing all of it. But it was a slow descent, and it's been a slow descent. So by the 90s, You had some really great, bands still being able to get out. You had a lot of great scenes. But by the early 2000s is when the DJs were introduced. And no offense to the DJs, but they did gobble up a lot of the opportunities for bands to be out playing. It gave a just much better, cheaper, easier alternative. It made the standards of how people needed to sound, much more about being perfect sounded like a recording, or else why wouldn't you just play the recording? I mean, it just changed everything to make music so accessible. Streaming changed everything. So the early 2000s and through up until this point, the last 20 years, is the descent accelerated. And because of that, I was fortunate enough to get on the end of that. I was still able to sort of make a living up until like the early 2000s for the most part, as a music teacher and a musician. But I started noticing more and more of the young guys coming up. They didn't expect to make any money from their music. I mean, they all came up with just having day jobs and being serious about music. I mean, it's not a hobby to them, okay? But they absolutely didn't expect to make money. I mean, that is unless they, reach the upper echelons, which I actually did know some people that did reach the upper echelons. I mean, they're Grammy Award winning touring musicians. So it was possible. I don't think any of them had connections. I really don't know what their story is, but I do know that some of the people that were about maybe 10 years, 15 years younger, they were still able to get in there and make a career. And you have people making careers now through their own influence on the internet. But as far as there just being a local musician who's able to, just be a piano teacher, go down and play here and there, that's what's gotten a lot harder. People who weren't necessarily looking for fame or looking for those national type of touring opportunities, or maybe they were looking for that, but falling short of that, they were able to play music as a career on their local scene their whole lives, and that just isn't there anymore. And I slowly watched that being choked out. I slowly listened to the old timers, just talking about how it was just so much easier. It's like it just got harder and harder and harder and harder for many, many reasons. And then COVID hit, and it was like singing, you could kill somebody if you sang your home, and there was a direct affront on live music in particular. And so when that happened, to me, it was like, oh, it's been coming for a long time. And this is just the death knell on the music scene. And it's not over. I actually know a lot of people who have rehabilitated themselves out of COVID. They've stuck it out in NYC and they're back out. But from what I can tell, and this is just my opinion, it's just way harder. And a lot of those guys, and they were world class, were already supplementing with Uber driving and Uber Eats, and they weren't, before COVID, they weren't just making it. You know what I mean? They weren't just. A lot of them did have to figure out other ways, but it's only gotten worse since COVID. And for me, I'm unwilling to jump completely back into it. There's just something so different about it now. And though I am still teaching music and I am still playing, I am still out playing, it's been a lot more difficult. It's been really difficult. And I wanted to go on and just give a voice to that. But the truth is, that is nothing compared with some of the stories of what Don had on his show. And I almost felt ashamed after I was on there. Like, what am I? I mean, I'm even still able to make a living doing music. There was a woman named Kat who had actually whistleblown many decades ago over human trafficking. I mean, who has the courage to do that? I mean, if there's one area you don't whistleblow in, that's one of them. And she's making it. She's still alive, but man, her stories were all about just letting go of your pride, and it has never been easy for her since then. I mean, she's probably lucky to have made it, and she has the most incredible attitude, the most uplifting, incredible attitude. But probably because her soul is intact. Like I talked last week, she did the right thing. Just like I was saying, it's so rare, but did society reward her for that? No. And is she still in a position where she's not being treated like the heroine that she is? Definitely. And that was one of the stories that broke my heart. There was other stories on there too of people that are just really having a tough time. And for example, doing Uber Eats or doing a job like that, and their car is all they have, and now their car is running out, you know? Maybe a story that came up a lot that really kind of settled home for me was that they went into caregiving, and because they were in caregiving, they got out of the job market. And then when they get back in the job market, they're older, they've been out for years, they can't quite get back in it. And that was the part that really, scared me, and really I'm losing the words for it, because it's so close to home for me, because I have become a caregiver in the last 4 years to a certain degree, and that has been affecting my my career decisions. I'm not 100% focused on my career the way I was before. And what are the long-term effects of that? You think that you're doing the right thing for somebody. It's a call of duty. It's something that I'm honored to fulfill. But I also can see how all of a sudden, and that's what some of these stories where they woke up, however long, you don't know how long it's going to be for. And in many ways, you're hoping it's a very long time. When it's somebody that you really love and you don't want to lose. But, what about, the job market and everything has become so difficult that if you're not, that's my question, if you're not full throttle on it, are you not going to make it? Are you going to pull yourself out of the game and not even realize you're doing it? So these were a lot of the things that came up on this panel discussion, and I would encourage you to check it out. A lot of good ideas came up from it, a sort of community spur that we really need to be aware of each other. We really need to, one of the Kat talked about was going to food banks, volunteering at food banks. And then in reality, the people who volunteer there, most of them are like pure gold kind of people, right? I mean, you're going to meet quality people there. But you're also going to get more of a pulse on what's actually going on, because we're just not really hearing about it. And there's many people that are doing fine. I know that's the case. I see a lot of them. They're doing fine. It's business as usual. But there's a lot of other people that have fallen under the line, and it's not all because, in fact, I would say many of them, it's not because they were irresponsible or drug addicts or different things. The truth is we don't know what their story is, but when you take the time to hear some of these stories, you recognize that the same exact thing could have happened to you, could still happen to you, and that we need to band together. We need to start looking out for each other in our communities and not just putting our heads in the sand. And that was one of the things that came up, is this idea of thinking positive. And I think on this, maybe I didn't explain myself too well, because I went hard in the paint of trying to bring the idea of, well, let me explain it this way. It's important that we really look at the truth, that we don't just get into the 80s and 90s sort of mentality of, oh, we'll just think positive and everything will turn itself around. Okay, that's a really twisted thing, just like so many things are twisted up these days. And it's why in reality, it's should be careful to not just give sound bites on things, because really it can be taken a lot of different ways. So that is part of the personality ethic that I talked about from 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And that is something that's been in play for most of our lifetimes, but it's very surface, right? So yes, it is true that our minds are incredibly powerful. I think they're way more powerful than we understand. What we focus on is important, but it's not as simple as like thinking positive, right? Because if you are denying reality, now you're just delusional, which is actually the state of mind of many, many people these days, right? We think if we just only look at what we want to look at and we ignore the rest, somehow that's using our minds in a powerful way, but it's not really, because reality is reality. There is some sort of shared consensus here. And solipsism is when you think you're the only person, right? It sort of gets into the simulation theory, like this is all a computer game and like you're the only real person. And solipsism is one of those things that I remember debating with a friend way back in my 20s, because it's just like the mere fact that I can look at you and say like, hey, but I'm here and I'm feeling, can sort of negate solipsism. Like you're not the only one. But to that person, they could just be like, well, I'm just imagining you say that. You're not even really saying that. And it gets so tricky, and it can be a mental illness, and it's probably playing into this whole narcissism thing. So to me, that's a very shallow application of the ideas that our brain is not, it's not an idea, it's a reality that our brains are very, very powerful. So being intentional with our focus is important. But the whole just be positive movement was underlaced with all of this emotional bypassing, which didn't take into account that that many of us have traumas from when we were young. We live in a very subversive world. It's a lot more complicated than we understand. And so it's a bit narcissistic and self-absorbed, that you think there's an inherent assumption there that you know everything, right? And it could be, so if you just think positive, everything's gonna be fine. Well, what about having to like be open to really facing things? What about really listening to people and where they're coming from? What about accepting that there's things that go on that are beyond what you understand, and that you need to be open and listening, because by bringing it into your awareness first and accepting it, now you have the power to do something about it, right? But if you're in a state of like, I'm just going to stay positive and I'm just going to look at what I want to look at, I'm postage stamp consensus, as David Icke says, if you're just wanting to stay there, well, then you're a head in the sand person, and you probably are contributing to the problems, because a lot of what's going on wouldn't be able to go on with the light of our awareness and our consciousness, but we don't want to look at it because it's painful. So that's what I wanted to say, is that I don't advocate for that. I don't advocate for like, hey, let's just be positive. But what I do advocate is transcendence. So you face what you have to face. In this example, we acknowledge like how difficult of a time that somebody is having. And we really listen to that. And it's not just listening to hurry up and say something, right? Which is another thing that's happening a lot. And I'm certainly guilty of this as well. But really being present with them and accepting it with them, that this is their reality. This is what's going on to them. And then from there, in many cases through appreciation, in some cases from looking at it in a new direction. In other cases, it's using something like music or nature or a higher vibration that will naturally pull us up. So we haven't denied anything, but now we have something in the light of our consciousness, and we pull it up into a higher frequency. And from that higher frequency place, now it's not such a problem. Okay, because that's how powerful our brains are. That when we get ourselves functioning from a higher vibrational place, our mind can actually see open doors and solutions. And in many cases, we call this miracles. Okay, this to me is what God is about. This is to me what faith is about, is that even when we're lost in a lower frequency, we have the faith that it's not the ultimate reality. And just by holding that, we will find a way to pull ourselves up. We will have a hand sent down to us that will pull us up or show us a way, right? So that's what I was sort of advocating on this, and I want to advocate here, is using music, using nature, using singing. And then on this particular show, they talked about the Rife machine, which does cost a lot of money for some people, and there are a few hesitations on it. But in general, just the notion that you can get so bogged down in your own hopelessness and despair that you won't be able to find the solutions that are right in front of you, because you're in this is a frequency war, and you are now being trapped in a frequency. And that frequency won't allow your mind or your eyes or your heart to see anything but your own despair. And you need help sometimes coming out of that. This is where psychedelics and music have come in. This is where people have maybe even used antidepressant medication. I don't know. I'm not here advocating anything for that other than, I would say, music. But even music, it's harder for me to advocate these days, because what if you're listening to music from, any number of artists out there that don't necessarily have the highest vibes? But the idea is that you figure out what that is for you. And if you don't know what it is, you pray about it. You say, I'm willing, right? I'm willing to come out of this. I'm willing to transcend this. I'm holding it up for healing. That's really what I'm advocating for, because I think it's important right now. I think the despair is so thick, and I experience it as well, that when you go into it, it's almost like it's more dangerous than it used to be that you could get stuck there. And there's a great deal of people who are stuck there. And it takes a lot of the spiritual work to get out, because it's not just as simple as like, oh, I'm going to think positive and be out of it. No, probably if you're doing that, then you're spiritual bypassing and you don't even know the suffering that you're actually experiencing. It's so crazy that can be true. But for example, have you ever seen somebody that seems to have dead eyes, but they're so positive, and their life seems to be going so perfectly? But when you look in their eyes, especially if you look at a photograph, it's like their eyes aren't alive. There's no spark there anymore, That's people that have maybe done a lot of spiritual bypassing and they're really living in a surface place. And what I'm talking about, and it's most of the authentic people that I know, the suffering is so real for them. I mean, in many cases, they are being put through some trials and they don't really understand. And they might be thinking that it has to do with their own innate unworthiness. But if they can get in touch with that unworthiness and not be afraid of it, if they can feel that and offer it up and say, hey, maybe I'm not seeing the full picture here, then I think that's when true healing can begin. Because I was saying this a few weeks ago, I think it's important for people that don't have dead eyes, that like are still in tune with their heart and their soul, even if they feel super lost, like they have no idea what they're doing, but they're still feeling. Well, I think it's really important that you try to recognize your own value, because I don't think the world is going to do it for you, but there is a certain importance to you being able to do it for yourself, and truly, right? Because our unworthiness and our guilt can hide so deep in us. But if you're, committed to really clearing out your soul and realigning to your highest vibration, then this stuff is going to come up. And when it does, you just got to let it go. And that's the theme for today. I watched Top Gun Maverick again, which is one of my freaking favorite movies. I don't understand why I love that movie so much. Maybe I'm pulled into the propaganda. I certainly question like who they're bombing and why we're bombing them. But I have to admit, just as far as a movie is concerned, it just pumps me up. And that was the thing that hit me this time, is how him and Rooster, and I won't spoil this if you haven't seen it, because I would recommend it, but he really has to do a lot of letting go with Goose's son. And he already lost his best friend, and now he's supposed to just take the risk that he could lose Rooster, flying in these, coffin boxes up in the sky. A lot of them die, a lot of them don't make it. They know that. They take that risk and they love flying that much. They want to do it anyways. And they have to recognize that they're going to lose some, and they have to just be willing to let go. But it's through the letting go and the not thinking, not overly thinking, just letting go and just going, that their true power can be unleashed. And that's what happens as well in improvisation. It's that same type of mindset that we've been talking a little bit about. So that's a way to sort of close down that topic a little bit. But I do just want to say, if anybody is out there really discouraged, really suffering, please check out my videos. Please try to see if some of the vibrations that I'm putting out can help. I'd love to hear if so. And you can always get in touch with me via my website, lyndol.com. That's Lyndol. And have a consultation, because it's so easy to get discouraged these days. And sometimes we need a hand up, and we need to, form a community of people that can support each other in real ways. Support each other in ways that maybe the world isn't able to at this point, because I think we're still being gaslit. I mean, I don't know what's going on in the world. Who knows? I'm so confused by it. And that brings up this whole situation with the music industry and the whistleblowers that are happening there. Now, I had heard predictions that this would happen. Okay. And if you're somebody who's been researching this stuff for decades, then it does seem like there's been an acceleration of people whistleblowing about what's going on behind the scenes. In the music industry itself, from the vantage point I had, which I'm not going to say I was super high up, but I got into some interesting rooms and circles at times in New York. And one of the things that it became clear is that there was such a level of desperation. It is so difficult for the average person with no connections to pull themselves up into the next level, and then the next level, and then right. There's always these levels you're trying to pull yourself into, and certain opportunities, one opportunity could truly do that, right? And I'm not going to count the internet, because I think that people were using that successfully in the last decade, last 15 years. I just wasn't using it as much, because I've not been very reluctant on all things technological. So I was in many ways just going the old school route. And in those routes, one good opportunity, that's all you need, because then now other people start calling you. Now you have experience on that certain level, right? And this is even just on a local playing level. Like you can be playing at certain bars, and then there's a different level of bar that's much harder to get into, and then there's a different level of getting into private events, and then there's a wedding circuit private event, and then there's the upper echelon private events, and then it starts to get in like, well, maybe now you're touring with some national acts, or you're a session player. There's ways of getting in, and once you're in, right? But getting into it can be difficult, because which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, you had the skill to be at that level. It's hard to be there before you get there, right? But like, let's say you did get an opportunity, somebody called in sick and you jumped in last minute and you played decently. Well, now within a few months, you're up to speed, and now you're at that level. That's a lot of the ways that it works. So I think I kind of got off point there anyways, though, because what I was really talking about is that you're so desperate when you get an opportunity that you're willing to do anything for it. I saw that, okay? I experienced that from a certain level. I mean, I honestly came to music from a more of a spiritual calling. So I definitely had very big boundaries. I was a little bit older too when I came in. And really when I started doing music, I was like 30s. And so I really wasn't willing to use my looks or my sexuality. I guess I was also a bit of a feminist, which, that's a whole third rail topic, because I don't even want to call myself that, where the whole thing has gone at this point, which we'll talk a little bit more in this session too. But I wanted it to be my talent. I wanted it to be based on my talent. I wanted what I had to offer to be something that somebody wanted. I didn't want it to be on my look. So I actually went the opposite way a lot of times. Like, I dressed the way I wanted to, but I tried to be very careful about not using that to get opportunities, which it was very clear to me it was very easy to do. But outside of those boundaries, there were still times when, man, like, I wanted an opportunity so bad that I would just, they'd be paying me a certain amount and I would work so hard for it. I would go so over the top preparation for that. I was making like $2 an hour, and I was more than willing to do that. Now, I didn't have a family. I didn't have a husband. I had nothing but time and a desire to focus on this. But what about somebody who did have a family? What about somebody who had kids? What about somebody who just had better boundaries with their personal life? I saw a lot of that. And how do they make it into the next level? Well, there were people that wanted it way more than me, and they didn't have any scruples about it. That was clear. And they would do whatever it takes to get into that next level. And so I saw that already, right? I saw that just from a much lower vantage point. Let's zoom into the elite levels, and you have people like P. Diddy, and you have these scenarios where where we're going back, people are just whistleblowing about these people, and you're just recognizing like they were doing what they had to get in that spot and to stay in that spot. And not a lot of it had to do with integrity. Not a lot of it had to do with character. So one of the things that's happening, J-Lo was with P. Diddy early on in the career. And one of the ways, people don't remember this as much, but I remember when it happened. Like, she went to the Oscars, or she went to some red carpet event, and at what was at the time a very revealing dress. Like, now since then, it's just gone off the charts. Like, they use this all the time. I mean, I guess Madonna was the first one to really champion this, but let's just get attention. It doesn't matter what kind of attention. And so J-Lo got attention for this dress. And I didn't even realize it, but she was with P. Diddy at the time, and he's like standing on the side watching him. How are we watching all of this and not just seeing right through it? Like, you're just using sex at that point, right? This isn't about music right now. This isn't about some She didn't get up there and sing something and blew us away and we were all talking about her. We were talking about her because she was willing to wear a tiny, tiny dress. And that got all this attention. Now, then from there, she could sing a song for us and get it. And she had our attention. So I understand it works. But I'm just saying, why do we have to admire that tactic so much? And then when you see P. Diddy in the background, like watching her, it just makes it all the weirder. Because the stories that are coming out about him is that he was using like the sex entrapment game to sort of, I don't even know, like, listen, this is all alleged, and I realize I've already talked a lot and I'm not going to have that much time to talk about this. So I don't want to speak out of turn about this. You should certainly look into it. But it just looks like the whole thing is revolving around sex and using sex to entrap people and using sex to get attention. And why does it all have to be about sex? I mean, that's my question. Good music doesn't have to be about that. The music industry doesn't have to be about that. I mean, we have a porn industry, but somehow it feels like sex has infiltrated everything. And when you look at a lot of these people, what they were doing, so much of it was revolving around that. And the part that really bothers me about that as a woman is then a lot of these same people turn around and are championing this Me Too movement. And like, come on. Like, we can't call the hypocrisy. Like, you clearly were willing to use your sexuality to gain a level of notoriety. Most of these people that were like wearing this stuff to the Oscars for Time's Up and solidarity of women, also, whereas there's a lot of women that don't have a career because they weren't willing to do that. Even something as small as not getting naked for something, or, you know, not even knowing, like, just the way that I look back and I see that it works is that they're always testing you, right? They're not going to just like come out and sexually harass you in many cases. They're going to like lure you into a scenario. They're going to keep testing your boundaries. How soft are your boundaries? How willing are you? And if you're kind of a naive, like goody two shoes kind of girl, you're not going to get very far with a lot of this stuff. And I'm not saying there's not exceptions to the rule on that. I'm really not saying that. But what I am saying is that when you research this stuff, it makes you wonder, because it is so prevalent when you really get into the behind the scenes and the research of it. So one of the things that's coming out now, J-Lo, who, you know, had this guy P. Diddy and gets all this notoriety from this dress she wore. Well, now all her backup singers, not all of them, but many of them are coming out and saying that she basically was cheating. And I never thought about this, but this makes sense. Like, you can turn the backup singers up and turn the lead vocals down. And now what is not a great performance sounds better. I don't even know if I'm that critical when it comes to the dancing stuff, because I've never really understood how these people dance and sing the way they do. I guess that's a skill. I don't understand why pop music has to be all like tiny outfits and dancing, you know, and why it just can't be more like Norah Jones or people just playing instruments and singing. I don't understand why it has to go to those big stadium shows. I feel like all that is so, personally, I just don't find that entertaining. And I don't understand. I mean, I guess at that point, you're more of a dancer to me than a singer, because singers want to just stand there and sing. Like, it takes a lot to sing. Well, if that's what they're accusing her of, is like when she was dancing doing that, I guess I can see how it's a little bit deceptive, but I also understand why. But I guess it's not fair, though, if the backup dancers were dancing too. But this is a trick you can find. Like, you might have found this yourself. If you're singing along with somebody on a recording, you sound pretty decent, right? You all the flaws are hidden. But if you sing to a karaoke version, now it's different. Now you really have to have a better performance. And so even just having the backup dancers already, you're going to sound better. It's going to cover up some stuff. But what the dancers are accusing her, the backup singers are accusing her of, and it's not just the live performances. I have heard it for some of the recordings. They're accusing her of sort of just stealing their vocal lines, pretending like it wasn't her, like pretending like it's her. There's a deception there, right? It's one thing to just say like, hey, my backup singer sounded good on the song and I'll give her credit. It's another thing to do it. They recognize their own voice, but they recognize she's kind of passing it off as hers. Apparently that's what, and they are like coming down on her on TikTok. Man, they're coming down. Is it just because of the connection to Diddy? Is it something else? Also, is it a targeted attack? I mean, who knows? Somebody could just not like JLo and be putting all this out, and it's not even true. I will admit that. I don't really want to get into the mudslinging, but the reason I like bringing it up is because far too many people are worshiping these music gods and goddesses, and it's gross to me. It's gross because there's so many good musicians, talented musicians that are around playing on a local level. Unfortunately, I think a lot of them have quit. You know, they say, I can't even remember what the percentage. There's such a high percentage of Juilliard grads that don't even play music anymore. So it's gross to me that all these people, decent people, people with scruples, people with families, people with interesting lives, that there's no value, that our society doesn't value their music at all, or just like encourage them to play or give opportunities to play. And instead we have this stupid monopolistic system that basically is now with the DJs just only playing the same artist over and over again. And then you find this stuff out about the artist, and it's like, if this is true or not true, specifically about Diddy and JLo, I don't know. But is it true in general about that level? I'm going to go ahead and say my vote, and I don't know for sure, is yes. Because there is such a level of corruption at this point, and that's just, it's hard for me when I have, you know, people that I love around me and they're not doing well. And then it's like, well, let me, you know, have you listened to the latest Beyonce album where she's gone country? She's gone country music. I don't know. I can't take it. And then these same people write a children's book, and let's read their children's book for our children, and let's have our, you know, young kids learn the words to all of their songs. This is my own personal thing, but I'm just like, God, you know, good people around you. You probably have a grandmother that plays the piano. Why don't you go listen to her? You know, maybe you have a friend who's a songwriter. Why don't you listen to her? Or why don't you, maybe you have songs in your own head. Why don't you start to play those? I think they'd have more value for our society at this point. And I'm talking from a zoomed out perspective. Yes, I'm not talking from this just matrix mindset. So that being said, I have talked, and it is 25 seconds till I have to go. And I don't even feel like doing my theme music for today. I'm just going to say thanks for listening for today. We didn't get a chance to talk about a few things. So next week will do some practical theory on music.